For this program. I do want to, before I get started on the history of golf, mention that I'm kind of an old guy, and golf is one of the passions of my life. And you always thought I was really passionate about history. I'm just as passionate about golf. And when you talk about the history of golf, I can't tell you how great I feel. And I brought along a few mementos. I haven't used all of those golf balls, but they go back to the golf balls stuffed with feathers to the most recent type of golf balls that is made in New Bedford, or formerly made in New Bedford at the Kushner Company, the New Bedford Titleists. Anyway, let me get started, and I'm not going to talk about all the golf in the South Coast in this period of time because I won't have time to do it. But I am going to talk about 4 different clubs. And my emphasis is very much on evidence and how I've got my facts, why I call it the history, because history is usually based on documentation. And forgive the artwork, I didn't do it. I picked it up someplace else. And I want to make sure this works. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of my own personal history and how I got introduced to the game, a little bit of an overview or chronicle time-oriented things, and some of the contemporaneous records. Most of them are newspaper accounts from the 1900s and 1880s and so forth. And so we'll go to the next slide, Dan. The sequence of clubs that we're going to talk about is the sequence with which they arrived on the scene. And the Reservation Golf Club in Mattapoisett, where I'm a member and several people here are members, is one of the earliest in the earliest in the area except for Newport. And I in honor of that, oops, I'm going to stick myself in the eye with this. I wore my reservation hat. And we always advertise, established in 1895. I don't think I need those. Too many devices here. On the hat it says established 1895. The second club we're going to talk about is a club called by the same name as an existing club, the Hawthorne Club, but it's not the same place. The Hawthorne Club I'm going to talk about is one that was in New Bedford. It was on Hawthorne Street. And it was there as was the predecessor of the New Bedford Country Club in Dartmouth. And the third one I'm going to talk about was in Fairhaven. It was called at one time the Bubble Links. I don't know how come my name got tied with that course, but a couple of Bobs around in the room here, so you can think of that as your course. It was only 6 holes. They planned to make it 9, but they never got to make it 9. And then the New Bedford Country Club in Dartmouth, which I also brought a hat, and they also advertised 1902 in the front of the hat. Okay, all 4 clubs are terrific places, and I've spent many years of my life on 2 of those 4, not all. 2 I've never played on, and 2 I have played on. In the early days of the late 1880s, some of the rich people in Boston discovered Mattapoisett. And this is a little blurb that you can read later on, or maybe you can read it while I'm talking, but a whole bunch of people started summering in Mattapoisett. And one of them was a guy named King who built a place he called it the Reservation. And it's the house that's down where the YMCA is now. And that's where we got our name. And it got its name because that location is where the Wampanoags used to have summer campgrounds down there. And he also built the road that goes from Route 6 down to his place. And some interesting stuff happened on that road that I once talked about, but I might talk about again, but maybe not right now. But there's been other things there. There used to be a railroad, the railroad to the Cape used to go right through the property, down around the shore. There was a depot in Mattapoisett and so forth, and that gets referred to. Okay, next slide, please. Now, another newspaper reference that popped up, a later reference, somebody found this trophy, and it was engraved with the Reservation Golf Club Ladies Prize, 1895. Mrs. F.J. Delano, she was the winner of this. Somehow it found its way to an antique collector, and he wrote a letter to some antique dealer, said, "What do you know about this place?" And I found it online, and it's another piece of evidence that they're running tournaments at Reservation in 1895. Okay, next slide, please. Just in case you don't know, and I know some of you know, but this is where the reservation is. The reservation, the C.A. King reservation, that house we showed you. This is the reservation road that comes down from, that's Route 6. This is a 1903 atlas. And there's the railroad that goes right through here. A quick story that there's no slide for it, so I'll stay on here. One time after the course was built, somebody came down to do some plumbing work at the reservation mansion, and they didn't see the train coming. Somebody tried to stop them, and they didn't stop. And they got hit by the train and killed. And a lot of golfers came off the course and tried to save one. They saved one of them from losing his life, and one guy got killed in that accident. We have a newspaper account of that. Next slide, please. This is what the reservation looked like in the early days, and Charles King is the guy that built it. Next slide, please. Charles King had a lot of money, quite obviously, and he got his money because he invented a beer sterilizer. And so when we tossed one up at the reservation, probably the sterilization process was initiated by Charles King, who built the reservation golf course and the clubhouse. The original, well, it was never the clubhouse for the golf course. It was his clubhouse, his home. In a Herald article of 1887, the next slide, this is where I got it. This is the citation. This is what they say. This is June 1887. This well-known summer resort is situated on the coast of Buzzards Bay near Fairhaven and is reached by the Old Colony Railroad. That was the track right there. It's a depot right in town. The town is beautifully situated on the border of the bay, abounds in picturesque drives. Of course, in those days, you drove with a horse and buggy, you know. Mattapoisett's summer visitors are, as a class, believers in the Episcopalian creed and are all well-to-do. They have their own doctor, whatever that means. I don't know why they needed their own doctor. They didn't trust these country bumpkins down Mattapoisett. Next slide. That's the article where the guy's asking about that trophy, and he was referred to Whitey Severino. You guys from Wesley know Whitey, and Whitey didn't know a thing about it, but he did talk to the guy. Okay, next slide. We're not going to read that. One of the interesting things is, here's a 1902 newspaper article. The invitation tournament at the Reservation Golf Club today was won by H.H. Stanton of Fairhaven. Stanton is kind of a big name around these parts. You all remember the Berkshire Hathaway Company. Stanton's owned the Berkshire Hathaway, who had the lowest gross and net scores and took his choice of prizes. I guess first choice got first choice of the prizes. E.B. Gray of Fairhaven and G.R. Hamlin of Oakley. Oakley and Watertown is a nice club. I played in the New England Intercollegiates at Oakley. A great course. But notice where the players came from to play in the reservation invitation in 1902. Fairhaven is the Fairhaven Golf Course that we'll be talking about a little bit later. Oakley is Oakley Country Club in Watertown. Fairhaven, Oakley. Essex Country Club, Columbia University. Hawthorne Country Club, the one we've been talking about. Hawthorne, someplace in San Francisco, must be Charles King's cousin. Palmetto, I don't know where that is, and Hawes from Hawthorne. And check the scores. It was a 9-hole course. I think they played 18 holes, but winning gross was an 89 with a 14 handicap. So golf has improved a little bit. Of course, we don't use feather-filled golf balls or gutta-percha balls and wooden shafted clubs. Next slide, please. Okay, in 1900, there was a little newspaper article, July 29, in the Sunday Herald. The Reservation Golf Club is having a clubhouse erected on its grounds. I don't believe it's this clubhouse we use at the reservation, but there was a clubhouse built in 1900. I don't really know what's happened to that clubhouse. Next slide, please. Another source of information are the early golf magazines and guides. And this is the USGA Golf Guide of 1902, page 186. And it gives you a little summary of the course, where it is half a mile from Mattapoisett Railroad Station, accessible by electric cars. So you could take the trolley car out to Mattapoisett with your golf clubs. Post office address, so on, so on. $10 dues, was organized in 1895. 50 cents a day if you want to play, greens fee. Open from July 1 to November 1. Membership about 60, 9 holes. And here's the distances in bogey figures. Now, my God, we thought a bogey was 1 over par. But a bogey is what we call a par, they call the bogey. So golf, there are a few things that have changed in golf. And I don't know that these are the same holes we have now, but I suspect that most of them are. I'm not sure which is which. Even we changed which tee is which every now and then. But that's what it is. Charles King, who built the reservation, was the president, Secretary Alice Stackpole. You can write to her at 292 Beacon Street, and she was also the treasurer. Next slide, please. Another source is the Harper's 1901 Golf Directory, and it gives you basically the same information. But in 1901, they told you who the greenskeeper was, who the governing committee chair members were, the captain of the course. Now, that's another term. I don't know what that means. Captain of the course might be the tournament committee chairman or something like that. Moderately laid out over moderately good turf. The turf at the reservation is notoriously dried out in the summertime in the old days. That's why we have a watering system. Prices were the same. You have a family rate too. Individual $10. Okay, next slide. Now, in May 31, 1902, this newspaper article came out. Possible Reservation Golf Club may not be maintained this summer. It's never used until after the hay crop is cut, however, and some arrangements may be made to carry on the club before that time arrives. Some Mattapoisett summer visitors are planning to join the Fairhaven Club. Just a little competition. Fairhaven built a club, and Mattapoisett, the reservation, was losing members to the Fairhaven Club. So they said, we better open a little earlier so we don't lose our members. That's what that's about. Okay, next slide. Now, we start hearing about the Hawthorne Club. This is our second club. I don't have a hat for the Hawthorne Club, but I could wear my New Bedford hat because it really was the predecessor of New Bedford. And this is a 1899 article in the Boston Herald. And again, I'm using contemporaneous sources because historians like sources as close to the time it happened as you can get, because that's usually the most dependable. This describes the course, and I'm not going to read it. This will all be available on our website, by the way, so you can read all this stuff. And I have it all online. You can see it online too. But it talks about the laying out of the course and how the game is. They've secured the Seabury Farm between Hawthorne and Allen Streets. Course is a short one of 9 holes. The grounds were in poor condition. It's hardly possible to have a good game. Yet it was very busy, so they figured we got a good thing. Next slide, please. And again, The Harper's 1901 Golf Directory tells us what the layout is and where it is and how you get there and what the prices are. So this is worth spending a little time with. It's on the New York, New Haven, New Hampshire, New York, New Haven, and I don't know.
Yeah, New York, New Haven, and Hartford.
Hartford Railroad, 1.5 miles from the station. Post Office, New Bedford, organized 1898. Entrance fee, $5. Annual dues, $12. This is more expensive than Mattapoisett, if you notice. Women, 6. 200 members. So it's in the city. You know. 9-hole course. The holes, 183 yards, 185 to 11. Remember, you're hitting a feather-filled ball. So those distances don't seem like much now, but try to do it with a feather ball, and so forth. President John Bullard, that's a name we all know. There have been many generations of John Bullard. Vice President Robert Snow, another local name. Fred Stetson, I think he later was at New Bedford. Treasurer Charles Hussey, Captain again I don't know what it is, Arthur Tucker. And greenskeeper Edison Russell. Next slide. I took the time to put this little table together because we had descriptions of the holes. So if you want to read those descriptions, you get a little idea. They're typical golf holes. First tee is near the entrance to the links on Hawthorne Street. Fairway is open and clear, and a clump of trees on the left. So hit it right, you golfers. Hit the ball right. The corner hole requires a drive across a brook. Not very difficult. The brook's right in front of the tee, I think. And so forth. The oak tree located on the west side. And second longest hole with a very obtrusive stone wall. I guess it's at the wrong distance out there. The hole coming home requires a drive over an artificial bunker. 4,524 yards, 74 par for 18 holes, 37 for 9. And you notice a couple of par 5s, par 3, and some par 4s. Okay, next slide, please. In an article in 1899, Boston Herald article, excuse me, they had these nice drawings of scenes at the Hawthorne Club. And this is the Hawthorne Club of New Bedford. Mr. Smith, president of the club. Dr. Bullard, crack player, with his soft hat and his gaiters and so forth. Women, one of the characteristics of the early game of golf, a lot of women played golf. It was a stylish thing to do. There wasn't the riffraff playing golf, like now we all play golf, you know. But in those days, you really it was the up and coming thing, and the English were promoting golf in this country by running exhibitions where Harry Varden, the famous professional, was over here playing exhibitions at these clubs. We have records of him playing at these clubs with the guy who designed the layout of these clubs, a guy named David Finley. Okay, next slide, please. And again, the Hawthorne Club, laid out by as per the USGA Golf Guide, very similar stuff to the other stuff. Next slide. Here's an actual photograph of the Hawthorne Club and somebody teeing off on the first tee. And that's the Hawthorne Clubhouse. It's still there. It's still there on Hawthorne Street. This is published in the Spinner History of New Bedford, the photographic magazine. And I've tried to keep it crisp, but it's kind of a fuzzy picture. Next slide. And that's what it looks like now. And one of Kathy's relatives either lived in it at one time or still lives in it. And she got us some of these pictures. This is a modern picture with wires going down the street. But you can drive by there. We have a description of the clubhouse with the piazzas. They talk, you know, in the language of the day, they talk about piazzas and so forth. Next slide. Okay, now we're moving along. The Fairhaven Club is starting to be noticed. And here's in 1900, in the Fairhaven Star, that was a local Fairhaven newspaper, They say the course of the local golf club will be located on Farm Field Lane at the head of Cedar Street. The fields that will be utilized are good golf territory, and the course overlooks the bay. The course comprises 12 acres. You couldn't put 3 holes in 12 acres these days, but they squeeze it in wherever they could. Next slide, please. And again, I took excerpts from these contemporary newspapers. This is a clipping out of the Fairhaven Star. The popular recreation of golf playing, we don't use that term anymore, golf playing, it's golfing, right? Or playing golf. It's promoted by the Fairhaven Golf Club, which was organized in May 1900. Okay, next slide, please. And here's some gossip. The Fairhaven Golf Course has been relayed out for 9-hole course. They never made 9 holes. 2 additional fields are utilized. The new course will be used in the 4th tournament for the Handicap Cup, which is scheduled for today. So they actually had run 3 tournaments before this article in 1900 at the Hawthorne, at the Fairhaven Club. And the Fairhaven was called Bubble Links and also called the Fairhaven Golf Club. Next slide. In the spring of '01, they got a lease on the Dexter Tabor Estates on the west side of North Main Street, a little south of Riverside Cemetery. If you know Fairhaven, you know where Riverside Cemetery is. So this is just south of it on the river. And extending to the Acushnet River, about 14 acres of rolling land, topped through a course of 6 holes, laid out by David Findley, the golf professional. These links are considered very sporty. Okay, again, you're hitting feather-filled balls or gutta-percha balls. Next slide, please. During the presidency, now we're a little later, 1903, the club has added 3 tennis courts on the land on the east side of North Main Street opposite to the links. So they're a real country club. 6 holes, but a real country club. Next slide. And even in the directory, the 1904 Fairhaven directory, this I inserted. Fairhaven Golf Club, off Main near Cook Street. Edward B. Gray, president. Harry L. Pope, secretary and treasurer. Popes were big in Fairhaven, as everybody knows. Next slide, please. Now, a little bit more on history of golf itself. This is from Spalding's official golf guide, published in the very early 1900s. And some of this, Harry Varden was playing exhibitions in this country. He played a 72-hole match in Western Golf in Chicago. J.H. Taylor was 3rd Open. Rubber cord ball introduced into Great Britain, 1902. So until 1902 or after, you didn't have a ball with a rubber core. So it wasn't going to go too far, filled with feathers. Harry Varden won his 4th Open, professional international match first played. Walter Travis, American, won the British Amateur. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going up to 06, 07, 08, and so forth. There's another thing about golf balls here. Appeal for patent in rubber cord ball rejected by the House of Lords, 1907. All right, so it gives you an idea how golf balls developed. They didn't develop real quick. And some of these other guys, Taylor, aren't really that well known. Next slide, please. Here's what the bobolink course looked like. 6 holes, play 3 rounds to get 18 holes, and 1 par 5, 3 par 3s, par 22 for 6 holes. That's it. I didn't have the comments. I didn't have any comments to make. But one of them is called San Juan Hill because you're going up the hill from the river. San Juan Golf Course. Okay, next. This is where the clubhouse was. This is a fairly modern map. So these streets are here. The streets weren't there in the early days. The site of the former golf clubhouse. All right, next slide. This is an older map. This is an 1895 map. And here's the cemetery right here. And this is where the golf course is, right here, down to the river. That's where the golf course was put after 1895. Next slide. Okay, more from the Fairhaven Star was a chatty little newspaper, and the library in Fairhaven has got old copies of it So I latched onto those. 1903. Many new members already enrolled, and one considers the many advantages offered in the new clubhouse with its broad and shady piazzas. Remember when we called porches piazzas? Easy chairs, ping pong table. Very seldom you find ping pong at a golf course anymore. Magazines and ice water in season. You could get a drink of ice water if you were thirsty. To say nothing of the golf course of 6 holes, which is very highly spoken of by all visitors. It's only a matter of wonder why everyone fond of the great out of doors doesn't join. They're trying to get members. Okay, next slide, Joe. Now, this is what golf balls were selling and what they look like. And give you an idea of what was happening. $3.50 a dozen. We pay $3.50. I think it's $3.50 a piece, isn't it now? Mike, isn't it $3.50 for a golf? Yeah. If you buy the right ball, right? Remade golf balls, $2.50 a dozen. Old golf balls remade. They'll remake your old golf ball for $1 a dozen. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when a ball, if you hit it wrong, it would smile at you, and you cut right through the cover. And you couldn't use it anymore very effectively. So you'd probably send it in and have it recovered for $1 a dozen. Not a bad deal. Note these new prices, remade, old remade, so forth. That's 1905. Next slide. And this is a picture. This is not necessarily any local course, but I picked this picture up. 1901 golfers and caddies. Some of those bags were still around when I was a kid. They call them Sunday bags. Remember, Bobby, when had Sunday bags? Yeah? And the green looks a little rough to be putting on, but that's it. Next slide. Now, this is a real picture of the Country Club of New Bedford before it was there. This is looking from, this is the State Road, the Hathaway Road, and the 15th tee is right over that wall. And the farm buildings on the golf course are right there. And this is a wonderful picture. That old elm tree I don't think is there anymore, but it was there for a long time. That is the State Road Hill, we called it. We used to ride our bikes down that hill, and some of you guys, the Vieira father and son in the back there, father and uncle, lived right up in Carrollton Heights up there. And a lot of us who've played a lot of rounds of golf on that golf course have been down through that corner, and some sections of this course, this was called the Sand Hill in some of the old descriptions.
You still play there?
Yeah, oh yeah, people still play there. We got Mike Gouvet right there is a member there. Okay, next slide, please. This is the first 9-hole layout of New Bedford Country Club. And this is the length of the course of the holes. And we could take some time, because we have a physical map of it, and go over these. Most of these holes are still there in one way or another. Some of the tees have been moved, and the greens have been moved, and so on. Just to give you an idea, the first hole is pretty close to what the 6th hole is now. It's right along the road. Tee is right opposite the clubhouse, and it goes down to the corner of Hathaway Road and Slocum Road. The 2nd hole is what would start somewhere near the 13th tee and go down Hathaway Road some distance. I'm not sure if the green is the same green, because the distance looks too far to be the same green. So I think it was further down. The 3rd continues going down, which is now the 14th hole, is down toward the corner. And then the next one is kind of like the 16th hole coming back, or the 18th, I'm not sure. On the map, we'll see. But all of these holes, one of them goes over the ledge, but the green was just over the ledge, not down around the corner. The tee after the hole that goes over the ledge is opposite the ledge, coming back to what is now the 4th hole, 4th green. And then the 9th is what we call the 5th hole. And it was a par 6, by the way. a bogey 6. Par to us in our language. I misspelled green, typo. Next slide, please. This is the layout. Anyway, this is provided and will be on our website and so on. But this is the first tee down to basically the 6th green. And here's the second tee, way down to a second green, which I think is beyond the 13th green, I believe. The third tee is right opposite that green and is down near where the 14th green is, but I think a little short of it. The sand hill is where the 15th green is now, but there was a tee up on the hill, looks like coming back to the 16th. Then the 5th comes back to the 18th, what we now know as the 18th, I believe. And the 6th is the first hole. Today's first hole looks like this hole right here. This right opposite the clubhouse. Here's the clubhouse. Comes up to here. Then we go over and we go over the ledge. That's called the ledge. And the green is just straight out over the ledge. Right now the green is over in here somewhere. This is Tubba Finney's house back in the early days when Bob Vera and I were kids. The house was still there, right, Bob? Yeah. We used to hit around it and over it and stuff. And then the tee for the 8th hole is not down in the hole. Now we hit from down in the hole, just above the pond. But in those days it was just opposite, just opposite the 7th green. So here's the 8th tee, up to what we call the 4th green. And then this is what we think of as the 5th hole. They got 500 yards. They might have had different yardsticks in those days, who knows. But that's the layout. And this is the plan published in 1902 in the Boston Herald article, contemporaneous with the time it was being built. Okay, next slide, please. And here's the words that went with that article. I didn't give you, the whole article is available. You can read the whole thing. But this is August 3rd, 1902 in the Boston Herald. A clubhouse is to be erected on an eminence not far to the north of the old farm buildings, which are to be removed. The changes to be made in the links will be under the advice of Mr. Olmsted, the landscape engineer. On the side, Mr. Olmsted is the guy who did Central Park, Buttonwood Park, and other famous parks. He's a very famous landscape architect. The golf course has been laid out by David H. Finley, professional of the Hawthorne Golf Club, who has cleverly taken advantage of the peculiarities of the land and its general outline. And the plan is shown, printed on this page, which I showed you before. Now, one other thing, the farm where the country club is located was once the farm of a guy named John Cummings. If you remember Smith Mills at all, there used to be a granite mill in Smith Mills. That was the John Cummings mill. He built that in the 1830s. He also owned the farm up here where the country club is. The country club didn't buy it from John Cummings. His widow sold it to some guy named Brownell, who sold it to the country club. But this is in the newspaper in those days. Okay, next slide, please. Again, I just showing you how things have changed. Now, I've been known to wear some of these kinds of clothes on a golf course, but only as a joke, not as my regular attire. And this is an ad for golf suits, coats, golf jackets, sweaters, waistcoats, golf hats, breeches, jerseys, shirts, drawers, shoes, etc. Golf balls, golf clubs, Rogers, Pete and Company. I don't even know. I haven't heard much about Rogers and Pete. Next slide. People used golf clubs in those days. This is Founds, probably an English company. It was approved by the Golfing Association of Great Britain. Golf was a big British game, of course, we all know that. Right, next slide. Also, golf balls were reusable. I mean, you could repaint them, and you could even buy special paint for painting them. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the well-dressed golfer might have on these putty spats. My father wore spats once in a while, and they were little short things, not this big long thing. But at first I heard of these, $3 a pair, $5 for a patent version. Okay, next slide. This is a kind of a famous old postcard that's all over the place. Everybody's got copies of it. It's a beautiful thing, and I think they got one posted on the wall, don't they, Mike? Yeah, up there at the country club. And sheep cut the grass down nice and low, and it saves a lot of labor. Next slide, please. This is the original clubhouse. That's a photograph, and this is what was in that newspaper article, 1903. Clubhouse, New Bedford. It's pretty faithful to the picture. Okay, next slide. They also had big plans. This is the same article. Plans have been made to develop the grounds to make them perfectly adapted to country club purposes. Stables are to be erected, tennis courts and croquet grounds prepared, and a 9-hole golf course laid out. So I don't know if they ever ended up with stables or not. I don't know the country club history that well. Did they ever have horseback riding there?
They never had horseback riding,
No, okay.
They did have the tennis courts.
Croquet grounds, I think putting greens probably make up for croquet grounds. I don't remember any history of croquet grounds that was in the plans, as this says. Next slide, Dan. Okay, this is another article on the layout, same distances we had before. Notice pause 6. Old newspapers don't reproduce too well, so I tried to make it legible, but that's a 1902 article. That's the same thing I showed you before. Next slide. This is Frederick Law Olmsted. He's considered to be the father of American landscape architecture. He's famous for co-designing many well-known urban parks with his senior partner, Calvert Vaux, including Prospect Park and Central Park in New York City, as well as Elm Park in Worcester, Mass. I'm quite sure he did Buttonwood Park too. I've been told, I can't give you a credit for that source, but I'm quite sure he did. Next slide, please. This is the same thing I showed you before from the 02 article. Golf course has been laid out by David Finley, professional Hawthorne Club. He happened to be the same guy that laid out the Fairhaven Club also, and the Hawthorne Club. He laid out 3 of the 4 clubs that we're talking about today. Next slide. Now, it's just talking about the land here and how at present it's cut up into fields, several being hay meadows, several under cultivation, pasturage, a lot of stone walls. Most of the walls will be taken down except where they serve as hazards. Some of the stone walls are still there. I think there's a stone wall, as I remember, on the right side of the 3rd hole is a stone wall, I believe, dividing the 18th hole from the 3rd hole. And they'll seed it and put in good turf. Okay, next slide. This is a little while later. I played there a lot of golf. That's me. I was a little thinner then. And if you took my hat off, I had hair too. But that's my golf partner, Terry McCormick. We never made it. We got to the finals twice. I've been to the finals and other member guests, but never won. I was in the finals at Resi a couple times, 3 times at the Whale, or New Bedford Public Links. So it had many different names. But I've played a lot of golf in these areas. Next slide, please. So just to review, we had Reservation 95, Hawthorne 98, Fairhaven 1900, New Bedford 1903, and David Finley is given the credit in these contemporary records of being the designer of 3/4 of these. Now I'm quite sure, and I know some of you have done research, that later on there are many revisions to these layouts, and other golf course designers were involved in those revisions, I'm sure of that. But I think it was after this period, if I'm not mistaken. Dave, Mike, do you have some of your research you want to share?
Well, I have the Hawthorne Club laid out by a man named William Campbell, who's one of
I'm deaf.
the Hawthorne Club I had was laid out by William Campbell, who was the first golf professional to win a tournament in the United States.
Okay. Well, apparently,
I'm not sure about David Finley was there, and he was the golf professional, but I'm not sure that he was part of that layout.
okay. So
That's
he
what
was
I-
there. One of the things that the Finley family was a really big family in golf. And Alex Finley was regularly on tour with Harry Varden. And once in a while, David and Alex would play Harry 2-on-1. And they actually beat Harry Varden in one of these local clubs. And Harry Varden, of course, is the guy, we have a grip in golf called the Varden grip, named after Harry Varden. But one of the things, Michael Gouveia, Dr. Michael Gouveia, has also done a lot of research. And one of the things we want to do in history is get it right. So he's going to share his research with us, either now or sometime or at another time, because he's had access, I believe, to the records of the board of directors of the country club. So that should be a very good source. And I'd love to learn more about it. Like the Rosses might have had something to do with one or the other of these clubs. Certainly, when the expansion above Hathaway Road, above Slocum Road came in, there's a lot more design work being done. So, and we now have 12 holes where they had 9 holes. 12 holes below Slocum Road in that triangle, right? We have 12 holes down there. So there's been some redesign. But it's kind of interesting. The Finleys I hardly ever heard of, but some people call Alex Finley the father of golf. And there's all kinds of articles everywhere in there about that. So it's history is one of those things that's ongoing, and we're continually learning new things. And we welcome learning new things so we can document the facts about what happened. And I thank you very much for coming. I made it before 3:30 for a change. And I didn't talk much about how I got into golf, but I was a city kid who lived in the tenements in South End of New Bedford. And my family finally moved to Dartmouth and Westport. And when I went to Gidley School, a classmate of mine said, "Hey, why don't you come over to Pascomanset with me?" That's another golf course that was in Smith Mills. "And I'll show you what we caddy there, and we play golf." So at lunchtime, I went over with him, and I got hooked. And I used to caddy for 60 cents a round. Sometimes double, I get $1.20 plus tip. Sometimes you get a quarter tip, which is pretty good. And eventually, some of the older people who worked there took me under their wing, and people that I caddied for were nice to me. And people that worked there, namely a guy named Dick Grace, a guy named Junior Bunno, and others, helped me get started in golf. Gave me lessons and free lessons, taught me how to whip clubs and do all kinds of stuff. And I had a lost and found club from the lost and found department, an old Olin Dutra 4-iron. And I didn't have a handle. So I put some electric tape around the handle and went up in the cornfields, the stubble fields of the Zala farm in back of Cedar Dell, and hit golf balls back and forth in the fields until my hands got sore. And I caddied on weekends, and they let caddies use rental clubs on Mondays and play for free. So I would play from dawn till dusk, and got really hooked on the game. I really got hooked. And a guy named Tony Vieira was one of my counselors, who was Bob's older brother. And one of my teachers was Walt Jerome, his brother-in-law. And a lot of people in golf are very nice to kids. And that's part of the way I got to fall in love with the game of golf. And I played an awful lot of golf, member guest tournaments. I still have breakfast with my golf friends every Friday. and I still love the game, and I love talking about the history of the game and the pleasures of the game of golf. It's a fantastic game. One last story. If you follow professional golf, you'll know that a guy named Ricky Fowler won a tournament last weekend. And I think you should all be rooting for Ricky Fowler, because Ricky's first coach was a guy named Barry McDonald. And Barry McDonald was a grandson of John Gilholm, professional at the country club in New Bedford. And Barry played a lot of local golf, including junior golf, with me and other people. He especially had a special partner named John O'Grady. Well, John O'Grady's father was the greenskeeper at the New Bedford Country Club, Mike O'Grady. John O'Grady was a real good golfer, as was Barry. And Barry is given the credit for teaching Ricky Fowler golf. And he gives him credit in television programs and writing and newspaper interviews and so forth. And many, many people in this area have made their livings in the game of golf, either as professional golf course superintendents, working as golf pros, etc., and so on. It's a wonderful game. You can play it as long as you can stand up. You don't even have to be able to walk. I have to take a cot because I can't stand up very well, but I still play golf. I don't play very well, but I still play. And I still beat some of my contemporaries, believe it or not. They wouldn't admit it, but I do, occasionally. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. And we have refreshments. We support ourselves with donations if you feel like donating. And this program is being recorded. It will be on our website, which is dartmouthhas.org. So you can see the slides and you can hear this talk all over again if you want to be bored a little bit more. But it really is a pleasure, and I do mean, if you have any questions or comments, let her rip.